every year, and the numbers are increasingly growing. So who could take a guess to how many girls by the 10th grade have been accused or have dealt with sexual harassment? By 9th grade. Take a guess. Percentage.
35%.
Up.
60.
Up.
70.
Up. 83% in 2015 reported some case or level of sexual harassment in the school. What percent of boys? Just a little bit lower at 78%. Okay. Most likely to occur between 6th and 9th grade. And then 38% of those combined between boys and girls were not from another student, but from a faculty member. Okay? So 40% of claims or allegations of claims start with faculty members. So let's talk briefly about what is and what constitutes, and feel free to jump in if I'm...
You mean that they report it? Or
reported, allegation. So it's not saying guilty, it's not saying there, it's saying the allegation was 38%, and then the total number, the 83% or the 78% for girls or boys, were in surveys. So that was surveys conducted saying, have you ever been a result of sexual harassment? Okay, that's from the AA, the Association of University Women study. But it's a really, if you want to Google it, it's a fascinating study if you ever want to spend a couple minutes reading it. So what constitutes sexual harassment, right? So we're going to differentiate between harassment and then abuse/molestation. So harassment is going to be anything verbal, visual, or physical. So it can constitute somebody says, you looked at me inappropriately. They're dealing with a case right now. You've probably seen it blow up all over the internet, where a student said a teacher was making unwelcome, gestures toward her in the way of looking at her. Okay, so just something like that can trigger a claim and or an issue. Obviously, saying something to a student or another student, saying something to another student, whether it's male on male, male on female, female on male, whatever it is, any verbal, physical, or visual. And then abuse or molestation is obviously the actual touching or violation of a student's rights or endangering their safety. Okay, so a little bit of a differentiation there. And then selective, our insurance company defines both of them here and states this in their policy. Each and every and all actual, threatened, or alleged acts of physical or mental abuse, sexual molestation, or sexual misconduct performed by one person or by two or more persons acting together, right? So very broad, very vague as to what would be covered and or what actually constitutes some sort of breach. So the goal today is to talk with you all and make everybody aware of just the little things that we can do to prevent any of these from happening here at Hartford Day. So one thing that we do, and we talked with Gray about, you will all be getting a document as part of kind of the employee handbook signing that is actually a sexual harassment policy. And what it does is it talks to you a little bit about what is sexual harassment, the same thing we kind of just went over, and what you do in the event that you witness, see, or think there could be something happening. Now remember, as faculty, it could also be something that you think may be happening at home that you need to bring attention to at the school, right? So if somebody's being bullied at home, cyberbullying is now the #1 cause. You're probably seeing that through social media. It says right now that 1 of every 5 students is solicited sexually online every day. Okay, so you can imagine what that's like going through Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm 33 now, so I'm not into all this stuff, but I'm sure there's more stuff on there. So you'll get a copy of that, and it'll go out to you, and read through it, and we're going to talk through a couple of those pieces. So number 1, the first and most important part, the school here is a zero tolerance policy. So the zero tolerance policy, it's in your handbook. Be aware of it. Any act or threat or alleged act is something to be very mindful of and needs to be reported to Gray. And then making sure we're not putting ourselves in situations where we could get the allegation, right? So if you're one-on-one with a student ever, whether it's coaching, mentoring, whatever, don't have the doors closed if you don't need to, if it's one-on-one, things like that. Just kind of be mindful and cognizant. Again, it's a sad reality that we have to even talk about this. because even with the worst, the best intentions, the worst outcome can still hit you. Reporting any suspicion immediately, again, it'll be in this document, but getting things to Gray, whether it's in person in a meeting, but it needs to be documented immediately, especially if it's gonna trigger a claim. So one great thing we have with Selective is they are specialists in schools, so we will have as a school, the right attorneys to make sure that an allegation, we're not just admitting guilt, but that we're here to protect everybody. So just making sure you guys understand that piece. Good.
Just remember too, even if you just have a slight suspicion, report it to management, because it's very important that we at least have some notification. It might not trigger a claim, but it at least lets us, or at least you guys know if we should submit a claim or not. The sooner we get the information, the better it helps us in our defense if there's any allegation, if it goes forward from that standpoint. So even if it's a small thing to talk to them, they might say, hey, this might trigger something, maybe we'll do a semi-formal report, maybe we'll do a full report, and then we'll go forward with that. So it's very important.
And then I'm going to keep this again as brief as possible. So if you have questions at the end, let me know. But so the last issue that we really have, and what we're seeing with sexual harassment, is the post issue, right? Once we've reported something, once we come across something, maybe something occurred, maybe it didn't. What happens on the back end, right? And this can get back into that cyberbullying, but it's still the school's responsibility on the back end that if something were to happen or be alleged, that there's no retaliation to the student, right? So it's making sure, another student's not saying something to a student about making fun of them for thinking, whatever it may be. It's going to be our responsibility, because in the event that a student's going to come back to everyone, including the school and the individuals, and unfortunately that also falls back to faculty. So, very brief. Again, you'll get the document that we'll send around shortly. It's just a one-pager. It is literally what I just outlined, so it's nothing that you're signing your life away or anything, but it's just something to kind of keep everybody aware of what to do, because we're seeing these in our schools all the time now. If you are to Google sexual harassment in schools right now, you're going to get an open report over the last 9 months. There's 180 cases open in, I think it's 7 different New England private schools. All the cases are open right now. It's turning into a class action suit. So you'll see that. You can go all the way back to looking at things here locally. I'm sure many of you are aware of some of them, so you can Google Baltimore and you'll see cases that have happened here. I just bring that to your attention because it does happen every day, whether it's actual or alleged. It is something that we have to be careful of, and we have to make sure we protect the reputation of the school, because you don't want to just have anything happen and our name be in the paper. Okay. So who has any questions? Is there anything anybody has about? Yeah, sure, jump in.
I don't know if there is one, but is there some sort of, I've read about the New England ones, issues. Is there some sort of statute of limitations?
So, good question, really good question. Right now, there's not in the state of Maryland. So, what happened is, people say the argument in courts have been, there's a bunch of different courts, and I forget the specific names of the cases, but what has happened is a lot of the minors that were getting sexually harassed, abused, whatever it was, they can't come in until they're 18 if they wanted to put a suit in on their own, and it's usually a long-term effect. So there's no statute of limitations, because if it were to happen to a 5-year-old here tomorrow, they couldn't put their own personal case on until 18, and if the parent didn't put a case on for them, and then they have a long-term effect, they can come back at a later date. So no, right now there's not a statute of limitations that we're aware of on sexual harassment or abuse or molestation. Scary thought too, because it's a long-term tail claim where somebody could come back and say, which is what you're seeing in New England right now.
Right.
So in New England, you saw this with Jerry Sandusky at Penn State. What you're seeing in some of these cases is, as soon as there's one person who comes out, a lot more follow, right? Or it's not usually one. I think on that study, I didn't write that one down, but I believe the average amount of victims for a sexual predator is 400. So don't quote me on that exact number, but it was right around there. I think it was 398 or something like that. So yeah, usually when there's one, it kind of turns into a trickle down harassment, class action almost. Yeah. What else? Any other questions?
I just want to follow up on that document. When you do sign it, the reason for it is kind of twofold. One is we do reinsure, even our insurance company has to reinsure because of the potential costs of some of these claims. So our reinsurer requires that they make sure we address, or have you address the policy every year. The other things from a defense standpoint, knowing that if the, you know, the school is notifying you of that, or you're addressing it every year, just it's one that helps us in our defense. It's kind of like, if you get in a car accident, the lawyers are gonna check to make sure you have a good MVR, it's just that kind of thing. So just, it's not a contract or anything like that, it's just the knowledge that you have, or you're aware of the policy.
All right, well, if there's not anything else, I told you I'd keep it under 15 minutes.
Thank you, that was good, appreciate it. The only thing I would add is if you, if for any reason you would be uncomfortable about coming to me with a claim like this, Valerie Colas would be your next stop. Okay, so you could go, if you don't wanna come to me, you can always go to Valerie, okay? All right, since we've got everybody in a room at one time for once, let's stay here for just another second in case there are any announcements or anything. You've got a captive audience for a couple seconds here. Thanks, guys, appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you.